Welcome to the 2021-2022 World Language Webinar Series broadcast. Our focus today is on the TEL, or Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning framework, looking at performance and feedback. Specifically, we're going to look at Performance and Feedback 1, or PF1, and its subcriteria. My name is Anne-Marie Gunter, and I'm the World Languages Consultant at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. I have my camera off so that we can save our Wi-Fi and you can focus on the slides you are seeing on your screen. Today's agenda is coming up. You see that we're going to start with a welcome and some introductions. Then we'll have an overview of our TEL criteria and subcriteria. PF1 is the teacher measures student language growth through performance assessments. We'll also do some reflection on implementing PF1 with our proficiency-based North Carolina World Language Essential Standards, and some investigation into how we identify evidence of PF1 characteristics and behaviors in our K-12 World Language classrooms. We'll finish them up with a wrap-up and some reminders. Let's begin with our welcome and introductions. I already introduced myself, and I want to make sure you have full access to your Webex event control panel, because that's how you'll be interacting to share about yourself and to participate in our activities today. So you see on the screen a screenshot of our Webex event control panel. Yours may look a little different depending on what type of device you chose to join us with today and which browser you picked. But in general, you can see that you have a visual where you can change the video layout, the panel view if you need to. There in the middle, of course, you'll see the meeting controls. Those are in hidden mode when you're not using them. But the most important ones are the ones to the very left, which is the little microphone. Everybody is on mute when they come into a webinar so that we can do our recording without any background noise happening unintentionally. All the way to the right, of course, is the exit button. If you need to leave early or something like that, you can use that. If you accidentally hit that before we close out today, just use the same link you used originally to join us again. And then towards the middle there, of course, we have the chat button. You see that looks like a little dialog box. I'm always watching the chat, and so if you want to put something in there or provide feedback on some of our questions, that's where you would do it. Please be sure when you use the chat box that you put it so that everyone can see it, unless it's something that's an individual question and you just want me to respond to it. And then also you should have some meeting info and things like that on your control panel. We have several guest speakers with us today, and they are joining us as they finish up classes today. And are able to jump in to our broadcast. Specifically, our guest speakers for this entire series this school year has been world language teachers who've distinguished themselves by earning Teacher of the Year honors, either from FLANC, the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina, or NCVirtual, or they've earned their Global Educator Digital Badge, or GEDB, and they're also one of our colleagues here in World Languages. I'm going to put some information about those particular awards and recognitions in the chat box so that you can all see them in case you're interested in pursuing those as well. If you were here for part one of what is today our part two broadcast on PF1, you may remember hearing from Jeff Pajot. He was a FLANC Teacher of the Year, and he shared with us on April 6th about PF1 in his classroom. Today, one of our guest speakers is Thomas Soth. His slide just came up and he's here, so I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. Oh, I'm upside down, sorry. Thanks for having me today. I teach in Chapel Hill High School. I currently teach Spanish 4, AP, and AP Lit, but I have taught all levels of Spanish over my 22 years teaching here in North Carolina. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks so much. And we're glad you're here, Tom, to share your expertise and experience with us today. Also joining us just a little later on will be Lisa Worthington-Groce. Lisa earned Teacher of the Year honors in 2018, and she teaches both at Northwest Guilford High School in the German department, almost all levels, and then also with NCVirtual where she teaches French. So she's sort of multifaceted when it comes to that, and duly certified, as I know some of us are. You see some pictures of Lisa there on the slide, and she will be joining us once her last class finishes today. So she will be here in time to do her presentation for you. All right, so now that you know who our guest speakers are for today, we want to know more about you. So our first poll question, which you can answer on your control panel, is what motivated you to participate in this webinar today? Was it to access professional development made for world language teachers? Was it to earn one contact hour for license renewal? Was it to gather information to share with others, or maybe learn about implementing our state standards from other world language educators? Or did you want to find out more about things like state standards, resources, policies, and the like? I'll go ahead and open our poll question. It should come up on your screen so that you can just click on the answers that work for you. This is choose all that apply, so you can just click on your answers and share with us. All right, we've got about 10 more seconds to get your answers in. All right, thank you for sharing that. You should be able to see all of our results now. And it looks like the majority of you are here to either access professional development made for world languages, which is exactly why we do this annual webinar series, and or to earn one contact hour for license renewal. And everyone who participates actively in our broadcast today will get a certificate of attendance via email following the broadcast. A number of you are also here to gather information to share with others. Please know we will post the slides you see, the handouts, the links, and the recording from this broadcast for you to use later. And others want to find out about implementing our state standards from others, or to ask questions or find out more about things like our resources and policies and so forth. So all good reasons, and it looks like many people have multiple reasons for being here today. So thank you for that. Also, given that this is a webinar, we'd like to know where you're joining us from today. Is it some region in North Carolina that you see there on the map? Our 8 different regions that you see are our economic prosperity zones, as well as our educational regions. Or it might be someplace outside of North Carolina within the US, or perhaps, you know, somewhere from around the globe. You never know. So I'll go ahead and open that poll. This is a quick one because you're just choosing the one spot where you're joining us from today. All right, great. Let's take a look. It looks like we have people from across different places here in North Carolina, which is wonderful, as well as in the US with us, but outside of our state. So welcome to everyone. We're glad you're here to participate in our webinar today. As I said, we're going to be discussing TEL criteria and subcriteria for PF1. And that is specifically the teacher measures student language growth through performance assessments. This last set of webinars, part 1 and today's part 2, seem very fitting given how we look at proficiency-based growth in the languages that we teach here in North Carolina, but also in the fact that it's towards the end of the year. So we're really thinking quite decidedly about how we measure how our students have grown over this academic year that we're ending, and what kind of performance assessments work best to measure that growth and to think about where our students need to go next. One thing we always like to focus in on is how these TEL criteria support implementing our North Carolina World Language Essentials standards, our state standards. And specifically, when you think about our standards, and you see this graphic here, what we call the weave graphic of our standards, you can see our 4 essential standards of interpersonal communication, interpretive communication, presentational communication, and culture, interwoven with our 3 strands, our connections to language and literacy, connections to other disciplines, and communities. All of that together makes up the fabric that is our state standards and ultimately our local curriculum in the classroom. Specifically, when we think about measuring student language growth through performance assessments, we need to think about our actual proficiency guidelines. We do have proficiency-based standards, and of course, within our standards, because of that, we have a proficiency level description of what students can do with language at each level and sub-level, and with their communication skills. Coming up on the screen, you'll see that that actual scale, and also the fact that it's inverted pyramid. So as students progress from novice low, the very beginnings of language learning, up through novice mid and high, and then into intermediate low, mid and high, and maybe even into advanced low or mid, that language becomes more complex. So the inverted pyramid is there to help us remember that as language becomes more complex and our students advance, it actually takes more time for them to reach the next proficiency level. Of course, that's reflected in our proficiency outcomes for each of our courses and programs within our state standards, but it's also something we need to think about when we consider measuring student language growth and performance versus proficiency. Performance in the classroom versus proficiency, which is the language skills students can use independently outside of our classroom or learning environments. If you want a little bit more information about the weave graphic that you see, it's actually on page 1 of our administrator guides for world languages. And we have one at each of those for our different types of K-12 programs in our state standards. We have one for classical languages like Latin or ancient Greek. We have them for dual and heritage language programs like dual language immersion and heritage language courses, which used to be native speakers courses. And then we have them for modern languages, which is where language is taught as a separate subject. So I put links to each of those administrator guides for world languages in the chat. You can access any of them. And as I said, this weave graphic and explanation of our state standards and how they're composed, as well as the actual proficiency scale, is on page 1 for you to use. Now let's go to another activity. We want to really focus in on performance and feedback. That's our TEL domain we're looking at today. And I want to make sure you have that opportunity by downloading that handout and keeping it nearby, whether you want to download it and print it out or just download it and have it on your desktop or your screen so that it's available to you. It is posted on the TEL framework webpage, as you can see on the screen, as well as in our chat box as a PDF link in our Google Drive, and that's available to us, in things like our Canvas hubs and our other resources throughout. So I'm going to give you a moment to download whichever one you want. You'll see on the right-hand side, that's what it should look like when you download the performance and feedback domain. And then skim the 5-lettered sub-criteria for this session's focus. Remember, we're looking at PF1. All right, I hope everyone's got a chance to grab the handout. So let's go ahead and start looking at that handout and really reflecting on implementing PF1 within our classrooms using our North Carolina World Language Essential Standards and what we know about them in building our local curriculum. As we've said, PF1 is the teacher measures student language growth through performance assessments. Given the time of year it is, I know a lot of times external assessments are on our minds. So external exams like the Advanced Placement or AP exam. I believe, in fact, AP testing is going on this week and next. Um, Also, the Cambridge International exams are happening in some of our schools, and International Baccalaureate or IB exams will be happening soon. They come a little bit later, more towards the end of the school year in later May or June. Of course, because it's the end of the year, we're also probably thinking about final exams and projects for our different courses that we teach and that our students have been engaged in. We may also be thinking about placement tests for the next steps in language study. Where do our students go next? Is it to the next level of language at a high school? Is it from one program to another, from elementary to middle school or middle school to high school? Or do we have students who are graduating and will be going on in the post-secondary world in some fashion and will be hopefully continuing their language study there? So there's a lot to think about with assessment at this time of year. But let's consider the sub-criteria for PF1. Sub-criteria A says the teacher ensures that students' learning experiences prepare them for the performance tasks. Of course, we always know as teachers we want to assess the way we teach. And so we want those learning experiences to reflect how students will show us what they've learned. Subcriteria B is the teacher uses performance tasks that clearly outline expectations and that have a real-world purposeful context. This is important too because we want our students to know what we expect from them when they show us what they learned, and also for them to find meaning in what they're doing so that they could take what they've done and use that in some real-world sense outside of our classroom. C says the teacher uses performance tasks that allow students to demonstrate growth relative to their proficiency targets. And for us with proficiency-based state standards, of course, we have proficiency targets for the end of a particular course or a program. And so we want to be thinking about how well students can show us they've met those targets and maybe what comes next. If they've exceeded those targets, how we work with them on that. If they have fallen a little bit short or maybe still need some time to build to that particular level of proficiency in that skill, how we support them in making that happen. D looks at the teacher using performance tasks that provide feedback on how well students have met the performance objectives. Of course, we all know as teachers, part of assessment is moving beyond just giving students a grade or a score that helps them finish out the year and post grades for the year. We also want to give them performance tasks so that we can give them feedback on how well they're doing in different areas, different skill areas, or in the different ways they're using to learn the language. That feedback is probably more important than whatever grade or score they get. And finally, E, the teacher identifies student successes and opportunities for modifications to improve future performance. This is something that's very critical at the end of the year. We want our students to feel good about the language they've learned and be ready to move forward into future opportunities to learn more about the language, to continue to build their proficiency, or to earn something like the Global Languages Endorsement, or GLE, our state seal of biliteracy, and then take that on to college campuses or into the military or into the world of work where they're going next once they leave our classrooms and our schools. So what I want to ask you, now that we've gone over these sub-criteria for PF1, is when you think about your teaching and how your students learn, which of the sub-criteria are professional strengths for you? I want you just to choose one or two, although you might have a lot of strengths, but I want you to just focus on one or two that you feel are professional strengths in the way you're thinking about them and reflecting on them today. I'll go ahead and open our poll. This one is a little longer because it takes some reflection, some time to do, but I'll go ahead and open that, and then you can share what your professional strengths are through the poll. Got about 30 seconds left if you're still working on your choices. All right. Thank you for sharing your professional strengths with us. I have set it up so that you should be able to see in your control panel now all 5 of the sub-criteria and which ones people chose as professional strengths. I don't want to give too much away here, but I will say in looking at your choices, A and E definitely had a good showing when we think about our students' learning experiences and also their successes and opportunities for future growth. A and E are actually the 2 professional strengths that both of our guest speakers chose to talk about today. So you get to hear more about those here coming up. But in general, there are people here with us today that have strengths in all of these areas. So for B, C, and D as well, we had people respond. B had the most responses out of those 3 in looking at making sure we clearly outline expectations for students and that our performance tasks have a real world and purposeful context. We also had about a third of you who chose C as a professional strength, where you make sure you use performance tasks that allow students to demonstrate growth relative to the proficiency targets. Obviously, part of that would involve making sure the students know what the proficiency targets are and what they have to do to reach them. And finally, almost 20% of you chose D as a strength, where you think about providing feedback to students on how well they've met the performance objectives. It's a critical component in thinking about future growth. Well, like I said, I'll leave those up on the control panel so you can continue to look at them. And now I'm going to turn it over to Thomas, our first guest speaker, to talk about his professional strengths and how he looks at that when he thinks about his own classroom and teaching. Thomas?
All right, well, thank you. So I'm going to kind of do a step back to what was commented previously, that your feedback is more important than the score. And I'm going to take that one step a little bit farther, but the student doing the task is more important than any of those, because that's when they're going to start growing, by doing something. And that's just kind of my little mantra for the last couple of years is like, to grow, students have to do. So the idea here is that teacher ensures that students' learning experiences prepare them for performance tasks. So they have to do things in order to be prepared for performance tasks. So the basic, fundamentals here are, you have to have tasks that have students listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And thus this becomes the focus when you're thinking about planning, and you see your performance task at the end, that backwards design. It's like, okay, well, how do I have students prepare for that? Well, they have to be listening, reading, writing, and speaking. So obviously the teacher maintaining the language in the classroom is a big help, and then pulling in outside resources so the students are listening, because we must think, what are our communicative goals? So maybe our communicative goals are, we need to understand what someone says. That's a big thing. Like, we want to listen to somebody, and that's a goal for a student. They want to hear a native speaker, watch a Netflix program or something, say, oh, I can get some of that. So the basic is students have to start listening and having some sort of assessment. And an assessment does not mean they need a grade, but they must be listening from day one. Sometimes things help, just like quizzes. Students listen to something and give an answer. Maybe it's something as basic as vocabulary. Spanish 1. You wanted a student to learn how to say, some basic verbs, and so you say, walk fastly, and the kid writes down the verb for to run. So caminar rápido, and then they put correr. They had to understand the listening, and then they had to write down another word with production. And they thought it was all about a quiz or a grade, but all you were doing was trying to hone their ear in to understand small expressions at that novice level. But then again, your goal is for the students to understand what someone says. So maybe you start with basic conversations, and you need to think about what are you trying to assess there. And if it's a conversation just as basic as, ¿Qué quieres hacer el sábado por la noche? What do you want to do on Saturday night? A student saying something like, movies with friends, fun, very basic, not the best communication, but we knew what the student said, rather than if someone said, ¿Qué quieres hacer el sábado por la noche? And they answered something great like, I like breakfast in the morning with eggs and bacon because they taste good. Does not answer the question, but gives us better language. And you say, well, that didn't complete the task. So when we are looking at understanding what someone says, we need to figure out how we are assessing that. Say, well, the first student understood. It wasn't a great conversation, but we gave them information. They answered us back. So also think about, what do we do with students when we're asking them to go through a listening activity and we're assessing them? Maybe break it down to basic. Think about listening to a small podcast, which can be very intimidating for students if they're listening to native speakers. But if you say something like, we're going to listen to a podcast on global warming, maybe write down 6 factors that contribute to global warming according to this podcast. And the kid's like, oh, I just have to write a list of 6 things. But the idea for that was to get your students to have the experience of listening to something and paying attention for certain details. And that was more important than them getting the right answers. So it wasn't the score, it was going through the activity, which was ensuring that students, their learning experiences prepare them for future performance tests or listening outside of the classroom. When students are reading, we start thinking about what can students do when they're reading. Well, we try to think about higher order strategies for students, but also things that they can do at multiple levels. We give them maybe, again, a little article on global warming. I'm doing a chapter right now on the environment, and students have to write a summary of what they read without just copying and pasting from the original article. So they have to use their own words. Or do students write questions about the article for other students to answer? Or can they do a draw and retell? Or at the end, can they actually give a small presentation summary of what was said? When it comes to writing, how do we get students to be more confident with their writing? Well, we make them write more. So students need to learn to maybe write letters or emails. So we give them the vocabulary to do that. And if you give them like salutations and or different greetings and ways to sign off on a letter, the students will be able to write a letter later if it's the end performance task. And then when it comes to speaking, the biggest thing that students need to do is just speak a lot more. And my mantra here is record, record, record. I don't know if people here use Vocaroo or any other online recording platforms for students to record conversations or students to give presentations, but I probably have in some of my Spanish classes like maybe 90 turned in recordings this year, where I really only graded like, I don't know, 4 or 5 of those, because the goal was not for me to have something to grade. The goal was for them to go through a learning experience that prepared them for real world tasks or later performance tasks. So that's what I would like to say about ensuring that students' learning experiences prepare them for performance tasks. When it comes to student successes and opportunities for modification to improve future performance, that's where it comes down to. It's so helpful to have a rubric. My thing is to get the students doing their work, as I've kind of been saying that. It's not to spend all my time grading. I don't know how, if you look at your performances as a teacher, or if you did in college or high school, looked at what you did and what you got back from your teachers, but the biggest thing I can say, when you have a student, tell them what they did right, 2 things, that was good, and then 2 things to improve the next time. A lot of times students want to know, what did I do wrong? And that's not the way we want to kind of frame that. We say, this is what you did, this is what you can do to take this even further. And 2 things. Let's say a student wrote a letter. Oh, you could have included questions back to or to the reader, and that would have made your better interpersonal communication. Because you do not want to spend your life grading. You're trying to spend your life trying to figure out how to students to participate more and to have more learning experiences, because that's where the growth happens. So really, we don't want to spend too much time telling what students did wrong. We just want those 2 pieces of advice. So let's see how to get what you're doing to the next level. Because doing a task is the learning. A lot of times when we are looking at writing samples and speaking samples with students who want to just get to that next level, we might need to say, oh, you know, all of your sentences are simple. If you wrote compound sentences, it would flow much better. And they might say, well, what's a compound sentence? Well, let's think about that easy. You have said, I like dinner. I like steak and vegetables, something like that, something basic. But then it's like, I like dinner because I like steak and vegetables. Again, not too profound, but the complex sentences becomes a little bit better. And then we might also say, well, you need more transition words. And since I don't know much of transition words. Oh, okay, well, here in your folder, you have a list of transition words. And oh, wait, look on the wall. We have 25 transition words on the wall that you can use all year while you're in class, because if they're on the wall all year, by the time you get to the end, you will know those transition words because they've been on the wall and you've had time to look at them, and it wasn't a quiz, it's just up there to help you. So that's how I like to modify things and identify student successes, say a couple things they've done good, and then 2 things for helping them in the future, because when you give something back to a student with 25 corrections on it, it's a blur. But if you can say, do these 2 things next time. Oh, and right before you take this next performance task, you're going to look at these 2 things, and then you're going to do better this next time. Those are my 2 cents. Thank you, everybody, for hosting me and having me here. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Sure. Thank you too, Thomas, for sharing with us about real-life examples from your classroom and how we can better support students in their language growth. I'm going to pause here a moment and see if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask Thomas specifically about what he shared or the tips that he talked about from his classroom in working with students.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, and some of the things you talked about really are great advice that all of us could do and probably do some in our classroom, you know. Having things up on the walls for students to use as tools is always important. And making sure you're focused on, you know, not only what's on the rubric, but in fact how students can use that information to grow. So we'll go ahead and turn to our second guest speaker now. That is Lisa, and she can go ahead and unmute and share with us about her strengths when it comes to PF1. Lisa?
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with y'all this afternoon. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yep, you're loud and clear.
Okay, awesome. Perfect. So I'm really excited and passionate about this topic. Maestro Soth and I actually used to teach together. So a few things that Thomas does, I definitely incorporate into my classes as well. As you heard earlier, I do teach both French and German, all levels from 1 through AP. So one of the places that I'm going to kind of focus on today is that transitional period when students are moving from novice to intermediate or from intermediate to advanced, because we know those little humps in proficiency between those memorized phrases that they use at the novice level to then really starting to create with the language, that can definitely be a challenge for our language learners and for us as teachers as well. So interestingly enough, Maestro Soth and I think had similar professional strengths where this TEL criteria was concerned. So I am going to start by talking a little bit about this idea of creating learning experiences to help prepare students for performance tasks. And then at the end, I'll move on a little bit into this idea of, you know, how we can help celebrate student successes, but look at ways to help them continue their growth in their language and intercultural skills. So this idea of performance is something that I grew up with. My mom was a music teacher, and, you know, typically when people think about the arts or music, performance just kind of goes into it. I don't think that people always think of the word performance when they think about languages or communication. So I think one of the very first things we need to do with our students in a language learning environment is to help them get rid of the nerves that are involved with this concept of performance. And I really liked what Maestro Soth mentioned about, you know, they do this so often that they stop thinking about it in terms of, is this for a grade? And what does this mean for, you know, my grade? And, you know, always being focused on that and really just seeing this more as a way to communicate and interact with each other. So really one of the very first things I do when I have a new group of students is a lot of activities that are really more about fun and about getting to know you so that they get comfortable with this idea of performing together and with each other and interacting. So we always start with fun, get to know you activities. I hope they're fun. I think they're fun based on student feedback. You know, we'll do little human bingo games. We'll play some Four Corners games, do little interviews, and really try to set that scene early on where students are in it together. They're forming a team as a class and they're supporting each other. So kind of teaching the students what that looks like to be a team and to support each other. When it comes to planning lessons and units, I'm a huge proponent of backwards design. And I think of it kind of as a visual where you have two sides of a river. You and the students are all at various places on one side. You know, some of your students might be a little bit further down the river, but you're all kind of on the same side of the river. And you've all got to figure out a way to get to that other side, right? We're trying to build a bridge from novice to that intermediate proficiency level. So the activities that you do in class are going to be the stepping stones, and you're going to help students kind of get to those stepping stones. So I'm going to give you two examples that I've been working on with my level 2 students this year. So these are learners who typically are there either just to get their credit for high school, or a few of them are really planning to go all the way. They want to have a career. They want to move to a German-speaking country. It's really, you know, a huge range of interests, abilities in the language. One of the things that students want to be able to do at the novice, high, intermediate, low is to have a little debate with each other. It's going to be a familiar topic. We're going to look at city life versus country life. That works really well in my particular learning environment just because the school where I teach, you know, some of the kids live in Greensboro and some of the kids really live out in the country. I have students from Mexico, Ecuador, Sweden, Korea. So definitely have some international diversity within the classroom. But again, they all have kind of different motivations in terms of what they want to do with their language skills. So when I think about, okay, the students want to be able to debate on this topic, you know, should we live in the sun city? Should we live in the country? Where can we make a better life for ourselves? What does it mean to have quality of life? What are we looking for in life? It's kind of these bigger overarching life questions. And I teach high school, so a lot of high school students are already grappling with this idea. You know, when I graduate, where am I going to go? Am I going to go to a small college, a big university? What do I want my life to look like? Okay, so that's where I want my students to end up. That obviously they're not going to walk in my classroom day one and be ready to have a big open debate on this topic. So then I say to myself, okay, what do the students need to be able to do to hold this debate? If the theme is city versus country, I'm going to start with maybe a little survey. That survey, I often do those online. It can even be anonymous, right? This is not for a grade. And just kind of get a sense, okay, what do they know about this topic? It provides some of the vocabulary that they would need, but really in simple terms. We'll do a little discussion board. Students can say which one they'd like, maybe come up with an argument of their own. And again, that kind of lets me as the teacher see, Okay, where is my class? And almost every time that I do this, the class is pretty evenly divided, evenly split, 50-50 on this question. I will have the students brainstorm in groups. They'll come up with advantages and disadvantages for each. Again, that allows me as the teacher to kind of see, okay, what are the vocabulary words the students already know to talk about this? When I did this with my most recent group, one student really wanted to talk about the environmental aspect, and just his German language skills were not there yet, which was great for me because it shows me, okay, what are some sources that I can pull into the classroom to help them get to where the student wants to be able to talk about kind of these deeper issues, not just, you know, using cognates like jobs or other things that are a little easier to talk about. So the next step is to pull in readings, little videos. I love videos where they go out and survey and interview people on the street. We'll look at pictures and describe them. We'll do little subtopics, look at transportation, the effects of transportation. So some of that kind of interpersonal interpretive understanding of what they read and what they hear. And again, the whole time as we work our way through this topic, the students are gathering words, they're gathering phrases and expressions that they can use. We'll kind of pull out of the topic here and there just to look at linguistic skills. So we'll play four corners in the classroom. I'll start with really easy topics like what's your favorite season? They'll move to one of the four corners, and then we'll just practice, you know, those expressions like I think that, because. And so where Thomas talked about, you know, longer complex phrasing, that's really providing the students with those phrases they need for complex phrases. In German, it's especially complex because those conjunctions that we use for because kick the verbs and we end up with crazy word order. We will also work a little bit on politely and respectfully agreeing and disagreeing. And again, that's something the students have really been doing all year. We have those phrases posted on the classroom. Sometimes I will say really outlandish things in the class just to get the kids to say, Quatsch, nonsense, that's crazy. Or to say, exactly, that's a huge word that German teenagers use, genau. And then by the end of the unit, they're a lot more comfortable to actually hold a debate because they've kind of been building towards it the whole time. In class today, we debated cafeteria food, and the students get pretty passionate about that issue, whether they should only have healthy things there or whether they should offer things like potato chips as well. For that debate, I gave the students the arguments. So you could have some of your more advanced students come up with the arguments the first time, give out the cards, and the students have to decide, okay, is that a pro, let's bring unhealthy stuff into our cafeteria, or is that a contra? And so the arguments are already there for them. And then we did a little mini debate where they're just kind of figuring out, okay, which counter argument matches the argument you've just made. Same idea with an end of year little social media post, just reflecting back on the year. Obviously, that's going to use past tense. So you're not going to throw that at them all at once. This entire year, we've been doing little chat mats every Monday. Hey, how was your weekend? What'd you do? What are you going to do next weekend? Kind of transitioning between past and present tense. They will look at messages that German speakers have written about what they did yesterday, how they spent their weekend, how they spent their summer break, what did they do over winter vacation, and then draw little images just to kind of illustrate, hey, I'm understanding what I'm reading, but again, they've got a lot of input through the whole year. So by the time they get to that culminating activity, they've had a lot of little stepping stones along the way. Real quickly, I'm not going to speak to E too much because Maestro Soth and I do very similar things, but we heard him talk about this idea of kind of the plus delta. That was maybe the more old-fashioned way of wording it. I heard a great phrasing for that recently. They called it the glows and the grows. So definitely for any kind of summative and even formative assessment, trying to give students a little bit of feedback on, hey, like that's really awesome. You're incorporating really nice vocabulary. You've got some really deep thoughts here. Let's see if we can bring the language skills up to match those thoughts, and then those areas for improvement. That's kind of the micro within your classroom. Going to a bigger level, I love to kind of help students shine who maybe wouldn't necessarily always get that recognition. We do a recognition ceremony at the end of the year for all German students, and I find ways to really recognize accomplishments that all of the students have made in various aspects of the language. So definitely helping the students see their growth within the classroom, but also broadcasting that growth to other people in the community, whether it be parents, whether it be sending out an email to the staff, letting them know about something cool, like a student who's won a scholarship or who's done something really impressive in or out of your classroom. Thank you guys for letting me chat with you today. I'd love any questions that you have.
Great. Thanks so much, Lisa. Let's pause here a moment and see what kind of questions come up in the chat box based on what you've shared. I don't see a lot popping up right now, but that could just be because people are still processing. Oh, here we go. We have several people commenting about an idea about a recognition ceremony to celebrate all the students in the class in some way. And Thomas talking about maybe doing a future presentation about chat maps. You want to share a little bit about chat maps?
Yes, sure. So chat mats were not my idea. They were something I found, through social media and presentations that other teachers have give. We all love to beg, borrow, and steal from each other. And you will find chat mats. Just do a little search for whatever language you teach. You will find them in all different languages. So it's almost like a table setting, like a little placemat you'd see, in a restaurant. But instead of having advertisements or having a menu on it, it has phrases that students can use to talk about a certain topic. The chat mats that I have, I just put them in sheet protectors, and then we put them in a little folder that are under each student desk. So almost every Monday or every other Monday, they'll pull those out right at the beginning of class. I project it on the board as well, and it'll just have phrases that they can use to talk about their weekend. So it would be things like I went, I played, I visited, I worked. Then there's a special corner of the chat mat where I think Thomas had talked about kind of leveling up students speaking or students writing. What are other things that people could talk about to kind of extend what they say? So it would be questions like, well, with whom did you do that activity? How long did you spend doing that activity? And the phrases are there. So the students are just kind of looking, finding, to be able to word what they want to word about how they spent their weekend. And like I said, we've been doing that all year in level 2, in the present perfect or the conversational past tense, without me ever having taught the past tense. We do the same thing at the start of each class. We do like a really quick kind of calendar chat. What are we going to do today? And then as we move through the year, we'll do that at the end of class instead. Like, hey, what did we do today? And I'll just put the infinitives for we speak today, we write today, we watch a video today. And then, by the end of the year, they're saying, we watched a video, we spoke today, without me ever having to teach them, speak is an irregular verb. The E turns into an O in the past. They don't need that. They just know it because they've already used it all year long, which has been really awesome to see these kids really comfortable with the past tense before I ever formally taught them any past tense. So definitely I recommend looking up chat mats. It's been really exciting since I started incorporating this.
Yeah, thanks for that. And what a great example of teaching grammar in context, of students having the language they need to express themselves without, as Lisa said, doing a direct instruction on grammar. They just start using it so it comes more naturally to them. I also see that Laura has commented that, chat maps sound like a way to include everyone and to create a very inviting bicultural and bilingual space, no matter where students are at with their proficiency in the language. All right. Well, again, thank you to both of our guest speakers for sharing so much of their expertise and experience here with us. We operate on the philosophy that teachers learn best from each other. And with that in mind, we're going to continue on now into the last activity of our broadcast today, which is looking for evidence of PF1 in our own K-12 world language classrooms. And specifically, when we talk about this, we want to think about what we do as teachers or what students do in the classroom to show evidence of PF1 sub-criteria. So those verbs are important. That's where our action is. And to do that, what we're going to do is a Jamboard activity, where we're going to consider what characteristics and or behaviors would someone observe in your world language classroom if they were looking for evidence of one of the PF1 sub-criteria. And I like Jamboard activities because it gives everyone a chance to share from their own classrooms. So again, teachers learning from each other. In this situation, I'm going to ask you to think about which PF1 sub-criteria you want to write about, A through E. You just get to pick one. When we go over to the Jamboard itself, I want you to take a few minutes to check out the other ideas on the Jamboard posted, which were done during the Part 1 webinar of PF1 back in early April. There was a lot of learning already happening there, and so there's a lot of good information on the board as well. And then you're going to create a sticky note for this activity on the Jamboard, where you title your post with the letter of the sub-criteria you chose. And actually, we've got enough information on the Jamboard that there are two different boards. So if you pick A or B, you're on the first page. And if you pick C, D, or E, you can go to the second page. Then you write your response to the question, what characteristics or behaviors would someone observe in your classroom if they were looking for evidence for PF1? You can include your name on the sticky, or you can remain anonymous. It's totally up to you. And we'll do this activity for about 6 minutes start to finish. So in the chat box, I just put in the link to our Jamboard. If you want the direct link, you can click on that first one, or you can use the bit.ly link, whichever one works best for you. I know some people are new to Jamboard. Jamboard is just another Google tool. So if you use Google already, you already have access to Jamboard. Just real quickly, if you haven't used it, this is what you'll see when you go there, and you'll see the little control panel there. You'll click on the little sticky note that looks like the Post-it note, and that'll open up a sticky note for you where you can choose what color of note you want, yellow, green, blue, pink, or orange. You write your response, and then of course you click save, and it posts it onto the Jamboard so other people can read it too. All right, let's go ahead and do that activity. Jump over to the Jamboard and consider that question, what characteristics or behaviors would someone observe in your world language classroom if they were looking for evidence of PF1? Just real quickly, I'll open up the Jamboard too so you can see it. And you can see we have quite a few postings already from our Part 1 broadcast, as well as from our guest speakers today who have already added some things to our Jamboard. Up at the top, if you want to go to the next Jamboard, this first one is the A and B, just go up at the top, click the little arrow forward, and then you get to the second part of the Jamboard, which is for the C, D, and E responses. All right, let's go ahead and work on that and see what we can share from each other's classrooms. We've got a minute or two left with our Jamboard. Notice there's a lot of things being posted. That's great. All right. Let's continue to work here for a minute or so, and then we'll do our wrap up. I know we're right at our time, but if you can stay just a minute or two more, that would be great after we finish this activity. If not, we certainly understand. And of course, we're recording, so you can always catch anything at the last that you need to. All right. Thank you to everyone who's participating here in our Jamboard. Remember, you can keep adding to this, so if there's something more you want to share, you can always do that. We'll have the Jamboard open for a while here, and of course, we'll use it in our asynchronous credit option as well for this broadcast for those who weren't able to join us live. For now, we'll go ahead and move forward and close out with our wrap-up. So for our wrap up and reminders, first things first, I will let you know that you can always sign up for our NCDPI listservs. By virtue of coming to this broadcast, of course, I will make sure that your email address is on the World Language Instructors listserv, either adding it or verifying that it's there. But you can sign up for any of the others as well. There's one for World Language Education News, one for Dual Language Immersion or DLI educators, and one for NC Linguafolio, plus many others that you may be interested in from my colleagues here at NCDPI, like for global education, or for charter schools, or for K-12 legislative work, anything that you're interested in. There's probably a newsletter you can sign up for and get that information in your email box. For us, please know that we are wrapping up our World Language webinar series for this year, which makes sense. We're at the end of the year, of course. We have looked at a series of things throughout. Specifically, we've had a part 1 and 2 on each of the TEL sub-criteria you see here. So EN4, which was about environment, LE3, 4, and 5 about the learning experience for students, and of course, today's work on PF1, performance and feedback. You can go to the World Language Webinar Series Canvas Hub for details and dates for all of this information, plus links to our archives and the asynchronous credit options. I'll put that in the chat box too, so you can see there's a direct link, as well as a bit.ly link or shortened URL to use to get to that information. Also, when it comes to asynchronous credit options, I try to make those available for several weeks after our particular broadcast on a TEL sub-criteria. So for our PF1, the parts 1 and 2 asynchronous credit options will be due by May 25th. It's a few weeks from today, obviously, but it's also in time enough that we can wrap that up and make sure people get their certificates of completion if they do the asynchronous credit option before June, which I know is when some of us are renewing our teaching licenses this year. Regardless of when we do the asynchronous credit options, keep in mind that the archives from our World Language webinar series this year are posted for us to use in local PD or for review and reflection for quite a long period of time. Also, as we mentioned before, since you're participating in the live broadcast today, your certificates of participation will be sent via email. Look for those in about a week or so from today's broadcast as an attachment that will come to you via email. One thing to note, as it says there on the screen, is that our public school units, that's our districts and charter schools, must approve professional development offerings in all formats. So that may be a very formal process in some places and just an informal process where you just collect your certificates and share them when you need to. As always, you are welcome to connect with me or anybody on our NCDPI World Languages team that you see here. We have, of course, our NCDPI landing page for world languages at bit.ly/NCWorldLanguages, and we're also on Twitter. You can see what my Twitter handle is, as well as the hashtag we use, hashtag WL or World Language Wednesdays, pretty routinely for our broadcasts, for announcements, for newsletters, for all of those things. I'll go ahead and put that information into our chat box so that you can have it right away. Also, keep in mind that in addition to myself working on your behalf, of course, I have my supervisor, Dr. Stacy Daniel. She's our section chief of English Language Arts and Languages. So that includes World Languages and ESL. And also Teresa Parker, who is the administrative specialist who works with our section. It's important that you know about Teresa because she is the one that will send you your certificates of attendance for today. So look for an email from her, like I said, about a week from today. That's it for today. We thank you for joining us. We thank our guest speakers once again for sharing so much about their classrooms and their experience and expertise in implementing information for students that looks at performance and assessment and how they can grow from that. It was great having you here and hearing the advice and tips directly from your classrooms. We hope everyone has a great evening. And of course, look for additional information about future offerings for PD coming up for next school year. Those will be available. We're also planning to do some summer PD opportunities that will probably be asynchronous in nature. So look for that too as that information becomes available later this spring or in the early summer.